There is, of course, the constant danger that should the avenues of action be thoroughly blocked by a severe depression or defeat in war, the resulting frustration is likely to be so intense that almost any proselytizing mass movement could find the situation ready-made for its propagation. The explosive situation in Germany after the First World War was partly due to the inactivity forced upon a population that knew itself admirably equipped for action. Hitler gave them a mass movement, but it was probably more important he opened before them unlimited opportunities for feverish, incessant, and spectacular action. No wonder they hailed him as their savior. (100) Suspicion. We have seen that the arch secretariat of the frustrated mind, though composed chiefly of fear and ill will, acts yet as a marvelous slime to cement the embittered and disaffected into one compact whole. Suspicion, too, is an ingredient of this acrid slime, and it, too, can act as a unifying agent. The awareness of their individual blemishes and shortcomings inclines the frustrated to detect ill will and meanness in their fellow men. Self-contempt, however vague, sharpens our eyes for the imperfections of others. We usually strive to reveal in others the blemishes we hide in ourselves. Thus, when the frustrated congregate in mass movement, the air is heavy laden with suspicion. There is prying and spying, tense watching, and a tense awareness of being watched. The surprising thing is that this pathological mistrust within the ranks leads not to dissension, but to strict conformity. Knowing themselves continually watched, the faithful strive to escape suspicion by adhering zealously to prescribed behavior and opinion. Strict orthodoxy is as much the result of mutual suspicion as of ardent faith. Mass movements make an extensive use of suspicion in their machinery of domination. The rank and file within the Nazi Party were made to feel that they were continually under observation and were kept in a permanent state of uneasy conscience and fear. Fear of one's neighbors, one's friends, and even one's relatives seem to be the rule within all mass movements. Now and then, innocent people are deliberately accused and sacrificed in order to keep suspicion alive. Suspicion is given a sharp edge by associating all opposition with the ranks with the enemy, threatening the movement from without. This enemy, the indispensable devil of every mass movement, is omnipresent. He plots both outside and inside the ranks of the faithful. It is his voice that speaks through the mouth of the dissenter, and the deviations are his stooges. If anything goes wrong within the movement, it is his wrong, or in his doing. It is the sacred duty of the true believer to be suspicious. He must be constantly on the lookout for saboteurs, spies, and traitors. 101. Collective unity is not the result of the brotherly love of the faithful for each other. The loyalty of the true believer is to the whole, the church, party, nation, and not to his fellow true believer. True loyalty between individuals is possible only in loose and relatively free society. As Abraham was ready to sacrifice his only son to prove his devotion to Jehovah, so must the fanatical Nazi or communist be ready to sacrifice relatives and friends to demonstrate his total surrender to the holy cause. The active mass movement sees in the personal ties of blood and friendship the diminution of its own corporate cohesion. Thus, mutual suspicion within the ranks is not only compatible with corporate strength, but one might almost say a precondition of it. Men of strong convictions and strong passions, when leagued together, watch one another with suspicion and find their strength in it. For mutual suspicion creates mutual dread, binds them as by an iron band, prevents desertion, and braces against moments of weakness. It is part of the formidableness of a genuine mass movement that the self-sacrifice it promotes includes also sacrifice of some of the moral sense which cramps and restrains our nature. Our zeal works wonders, and it seconds our propensity to hatred, cruelty, ambition, avarice, detraction, and rebellion. The effects of unification. 102. Through unification, whether brought by spontaneous surrender, persuasion, coercion, necessity, or ingrained habit, or a combination of these, tends to intensify the inclinations and attitudes which promote unity. We have seen that unification intensifies the propensity to hatred and the imitative capacity. It is also true that the unified individual is more credulous and obedient than the potential true believer, who is still an autonomous individual. Through it is true that the leadership of the collective body usually keep hatred at a white heat, encourages imitation and credulity, and forces obedience. The fact remains that unification by itself, even when not aided by manipulations of the leadership, intensifies the reactions which function as unifying agents. This at first sight is a surprising fact. We have seen that most unifying factors originate in the revulsion of the frustrated individual from an unwanted self to an untenable existence. But the true believer who is wholly assimilated into a compact collective body is no longer frustrated. He has found a new identity and a new life. He is one of the chosen, bolstered and protected by invisible powers and destined to inherit the earth. His is a state of mind the very opposite of that of the frustrated individual, yet he displays with increased intensity all the reactions which us symptomatic of the inner tension and insecurity. What happens to the unified individual? Unification is more a process of diminution than of addition. In order to be assimilated into a collective medium, a person has to be stripped of his individual distinctness. He has to be deprived of free choice and independent judgment. Any of his natural bents and impulses have to be suppressed or blunted. All these are acts of diminution. The elements which are apparently added, faith, hope, pride, confidence, are negative in origin. The exaltation of the true believer does not flow from reserves of strength and wisdom, but from a sense of deliverance. He has been delivered from the meaningless burdens of an autonomous existence. We Germans are so happy we are free from freedom. His happiness and fortitude come from his no longer being himself. Attacks against the self cannot touch him. His powers of endurance, when at the mercy of an implacable enemy, or when facing insurmountable circumstances, are superior to those of an autonomous individual. But this invincibility depends upon the lifeline which connects him with the collective whole. As long as he feels himself part of that whole and nothing else, he is indestructible and immortal. All his fervor and fanaticism are therefore clustered around this lifeline. His striving for utmost unity is more intense than the vague longing of the frustrated for an escape from the untenable self. The frustrated individual still has a choice. He can find a new life not only by becoming part of a corporate body, but also by changing his environment or by throwing himself wholeheartedly into some absorbing undertaking. The unified individual, on the other hand, has no choice. He must cling to the collective body, or like a fallen leaf wither and fade. It is doubtful whether the excommunicated priest, the expelled communist, and the renegade chauvinist can ever find peace of mind as autonomous individuals. They cannot stand on their own, but must embrace a new cause and attach themselves to a new group. The true believer is eternally incomplete and eternally insecure. 103. It is of interest to note that means by which a mass movement extenuates and perpetuates the individual incompleteness of its adherents. By elevating dogma above reason, the individual's intelligence is prevented from becoming self-reliant. Economic dependence is maintained by centralizing economic power and by deliberately created sacredity of the necessities of life. Social self-sufficiency is discouraged by crowded housing or communal quarters and by enforced daily participation in public functions. Ruthless censorship of literature, art, music, and science prevents even the creative few from living self-sufficient lives. The inoculated devotions to the church, party, country, leader, and creed also perpetuate a state of incompleteness, for every devotion is a socket which demands the fitting in of a complementary part from without. Thus people raised in the atmosphere of a mass movement are fashioned into incomplete and dependent human beings, even when they have within themselves the making of self-sufficient entities. Through strangers to frustration and without a grievance, they will yet exhibit the peculiarities of people who crave to lose themselves and be rid of existence that is irrecoverably spoiled. Part 4. Beginning and End. Men of Words. 104. Mass movements do not usually rise until the prevailing order has been discredited. The discrediting is not an automatic result of the blunders and abuses of those in power, but the deliberate work of men of words with a grievance. Where the articulate are absent or without a grievance, the prevailing dispensation, through incompetent and corrupt, may continue in power until it falls and crumbles of itself. On the other hand, a dispensation of undoubted merit and vigor may be swept away if it fails to win the allegiance of the articulate minority. As pointed out in Section 83 and 86, the realization and perpetration of a mass movement depend on force. A full-blown mass movement is a ruthless affair, and its management is in the hands of ruthless fanatics who use words only to give an appearance of spontaneity to a consent obtained by coercion. But these fanatics can move in and take charge only after the prevailing order has been discredited and has lost the allegiance of the masses. The preliminary work of undermining existing institutions, of familiarizing the masses with the ideas of change, and of creating a receptivity to a new faith can be done only by men who are first and foremost talkers or writers and are recognized as such by all. As long as the existing order functions in a more or less orderly fashion, the masses remain basically conservative. They can't think of reform, but not of total innovation. The fanatical extremist, no matter how eloquent, strikes them as dangerous, traitorous, impractical, or even insane. They will not listen to him, letting himself recognize that where the ground is not ready for them, the communists find it hard to approach the masses, and even to get them to listen to them. Moreover, the authorities, even when feeble or tolerant, are likely to react violently against the activist tactics of the fanatic and may gain from his activities, as it were, a new vigor. Things are different in the case of the typical man of words. The masses listen to him because they know that his words, however urgent, cannot have immediate results. The authorities either ignore him or use mild methods to muzzle him. Thus, impeccably, the man imperceptibly, the man of words undermines established institutions, discredits those in power, weakens prevailing beliefs and loyalties, and sets the stage for the rise of a mass movement. The division between men of words, fanatics, and practical men of action, as outlined in the following sections, is not meant to be categorical. Men like Gandhi and Trotsky start out as apparently ineffectual men of words, and later display exceptional talents as administrators or generals. A man like Muhammad starts out as a man of words, develops into an implacable fanatic, and finally reveals a superb practical sense. A fanatic like Lenin is a master of the spoken word and unequaled as a man of action. What the classification attempts to suggest is that the readying of the ground for a mass movement is done best by men whose chief claim to excellence is their skill in the use of the spoken or written word. That the hatching of an actual movement requires the temperament and the talents of the fanatic, and that the final consolidation of the movement is largely the work of practical men of action. The emergence of an articulate minority, where there was none before, is a potential revolutionary step. The Western powers were indirect and unknowing fomenters of mass movements in Asia, not only by kindling resentment, see Section 1, but also by creating articulate minorities through educational work, which was largely philanthropic. Many of the revolutionary leaders in India, China, and Indonesia received their training in conservative Western institutions. The American College at Beirut, which is directed and supported by God-fearing conservative Americans, is a school for revolutionaries in the illiterate Arabic world. Nor is there any doubt that the God-fearing missionary school teachers in China were unknowingly among those who prepped the ground for the Chinese Revolution. 105. The men of words are of diverse types. They can be priests, scribes, prophets, writers, artists, professors, students, and intellectuals in general. Whereas in China reading and writing is a difficult art, mere literacy can give one the status of a man of words. A similar situation prevailed in ancient Egypt, where the art of picture writing was the monopoly of a minority. Whatever the type, there is a deep-seated craving common to almost all men of words, which determines their attitude with the prevailing order. It is a craving of recognition, a craving for clearly marked status above the common run of humanity. Vanity, said Napoleon, made the revolution. Liberty was only a pretext. There is apparently an inemerable security in its core of every intellectual to be non-creative or creative. Even the most gifted and prolific seem to live a life eternal self-doubting and have to prove their worth anew each day. What de Remusat said of the Thiers is perhaps true of most men of words. He has much more vanity than ambition, and he prefers consideration to obedience, and the appearance of power to power itself. Consult him constantly, and then do just as you please. He will take mere notice of your deference to him and of your actions. There is a moment in the career of almost every fault-finding man of words when a deferential or conciliatory gesture from those in power may win him over to their side. At a certain stage, most men of words are ready to become time-servers. And is that a crying baby? Pardon me. He has much more vanity than ambition, and he prefers consideration to obedience and the appearance of power to power itself. Consult him constantly, and then do just as you please. He will take more notice of your deference to him than of your actions. There is a moment in the career of almost every fault-finding man of words when deferential and conciliatory gesture from those in power may win him over to their side. At a certain stage, most men of words are ready to become time-servers and courtiers. Jesus himself might not have preached the new gospel had the dominant Pharisees taken him into the fold, called him rabbi, and listened to him with deference. The biosphere conferred on the Luther at the right moment might have cooled his ardor for a reformation. The young Karl Marx could perhaps have been won over by Presendum by the bestowal of a title and important government job, and Lassalle by a title and court uniform. It is true that once the man of words formulates a philosophy and a program, he is likely to stand by them and be immune to blandishments and enticements. However, much of the protesting man of words sees himself as the champion of the downtrodden and injured. The grievance which animates him is, with a very few exceptions, private and personal. His pity is usually hatched out of his hatred for the powers that be. There is only a few rare and exceptional men who have that kind of love toward mankind at large that makes them unable to endure patiently the general mass of evil and suffering, regardless of any relation it may have to their own lives. Thoreau states the fact that fierce extravagance, quote, I believe that What so saddens the reformer is not his sympathy for